what we're going to try and do. So we've got counterbalanced that I just showed you. And then I suppose the opposite of counterbalance would be like bookends, so balanced. Yeah. So I don't know if you've probably done it that way, you've probably done it that way before, if you've ever seen a piece that has got that exact balance aspect of it, that works as well. It's strange that those things both work, but by doing this you're going to start to see why paintings work and why abstract paintings work and when they don't work. So this is really unbalanced. This is sort of asymmetry, so creating tension. You might have a really heavy side to the painting and a really light negative space with just a tiny, tiny bit of whatever colour or mark there is in the painting. Lots of paintings you just see like a random abstract group mass, and that seems to work anywhere if you're just having one group mass. But also that leads me on to show you centred. So sometimes lovely sort of pieces that have this sort of central emerging mass to them that works really well in a painting. So we've covered those two, covered that. So then diagonal marks, there's sort of diagonal composition. You can see that. I've done a little bit of a counter diagonal there, but diagonal marks that sort of cross each other, and I quite like diagonal marks to be heavier on one side and then lighter on the other. But diagonal marks are an interesting one, so we're going to try all of these in a second. And I'll set up and show you how to do one of them. So centred and diagonal. Then a cruciform. It's really interesting. I always like an off-centre cruciform composition. And it might not look just like that. You might just be painting with your roller that way and do a little bit of that. And suddenly it's got that sort of cross-type shape within, or cross-type marks within your piece. So it's not, your piece isn't necessarily going to look like a big dark cross in it. But that sort of gives you an idea of how you could apply the paint. And of course, elements of all these different things can be used. So you could have a little bit of vertical marks with a cruciform over that. But it's just understanding why certain structures work and certain structures get lost. Then vertical marks. I find a lot of my paintings tend to have vertical marks. Don't know why. It's just maybe to do with nature, to do with falling, to do with rain. I'm not entirely sure you've had to psychologically unpick what I'm doing, but it's something I'm drawn to. And I think that that's something you'll find as you go along. There'll be a certain type of form that you're way more drawn to. And some people won't ever paint with these long, elongated marks. Everything's curvy and just comes from within. And I think, like I said on the Meet the Artist, there's no two people that will paint exactly the same. It's different hands, different psychology, and this is a really good way of nurturing that, rather than coming to a class and trying to copy the teacher or copy a certain artist. This is about finding you. So, horizontal marks. I mean, sometimes my paintings end up quite horizontal, but always with a bit of drag for me. So it's always going towards that cruciform rather than being totally horizontal marks. And then this is something I don't do very often, but I've seen loads of people doing that, radiating kind of starburst type marks. It's almost floral, it's quite feminine, it's quite soft, isn't it? So, and very biomorphic, it's very organic. So that's interesting as well. There's some very different types of approach, and sometimes I don't feel like, when I draw, I do more constellation style marks. So I'll do more spots and dots. I've got some pieces up at the gallery at the moment, and you'll see it's very much like that, very constellation-y. But yes, so it's something that perhaps doesn't come naturally when I'm painting, or be a latter layer of the painting, but it's interesting, it might be something you really take to. So linear marks as well. So linear marks, but all very confused, that's quite nice. When you're making a mark, if you keep repeating it, it tends to bring the piece together a little bit more. I love lots of diverse mark making, but for form, I think your marks need to have some kind of a continuity. So that's another one. And then the last two, oh, I don't know what this one is. Yeah, well, we might have to edit that out. It's practically the whole composition being taken up. But triangular compositions, I never ever paint in triangles, but I've got a friend that does it. I'll text her and see if she can send me over a piece. But loads of really textured triangles. Interesting. It might be something you take to. So that, when I say triangles, I'm saying that she was single until literally before Easter Sunday, and now she's getting married. So the less we say about her private life, probably the better. But yes, I don't know what I was trying to do here. This is probably when my toddler interrupted me. But yeah, this is a sort of counterbalance type thing. I think that's really playing around with negative space, isn't it? Using up most of the negative space and leaving very little of that showing. So you've got sort of several group masses. Yeah, I'm sure that's a group mass. That would make sense, wouldn't it? So what you need to do...
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, absolutely.
I heard in abstract that you should, like if you're doing a darker area for your contrast, that has to be, I don't know if it has to be.
No, there's no rules.
But is it, am I right thinking a third, they say? Is that right? So I'm looking at yours and, like you say, the negative space is less than a third.
Yeah. So obviously, the theory of thirds is really important in all aesthetics. It links into the Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah,
so it's a naturally occurring pattern in nature that appeals to us. Because it occurs in nature, it appeals to our eyes, doesn't it? In the simplest of terms, 3 flower pots in a row looks better than just 2, and you wouldn't have 4, you'd have 5. So it's like that idea of numbers. So in terms of thirds, yeah, it's quite an easy one. If you were working with 3 colours, you might have, if you were working with 2 colours, you might have 2/3 of the painting, one of those colours, and a third another. So in terms of balance, yes, it's really important. And yeah, with this, I would say you've probably got 2/3 dark and 1/3 light. Yeah, so in terms of, we will be talking about balance and composition, and I touched on it, didn't I? So colour balance in terms of warm versus cool, colour balance in terms of dark versus light, and saturated versus muted. They're usually most appealing used in the theory of thirds. So for instance, dark versus light, you'd perhaps have 2/3 dark, 1/3 light in one piece, and maybe 1/3 dark, vice versa.
Because I automatically draw all the negative space with the white, but it can be black, can't it?
Yeah, of course. So it doesn't matter which way around. And of course, if you're working with several different colours, then it gets more complex. And then if you're working with other things like the warmth of the colour as well, you're adding an extra element in, so it gets a bit sort of quite complicated, but we can unpick it. Once you've unpicked it, you can forget it and then paint, and it does start to come out. It sort of sinks into the brain somehow, or one would hope anyway. I think you've got to practice it 5 times, haven't you, or something, for it to, or 10 times, for it to really, no. But that's why I'm starting with this rather than thinking about that. Let's just think about form today and keep it really simple. So I've got a tile. So I've got acrylic paper for this one. So it's acrylic paper for the drawings. And you can make yourself a nice little sort of reference sheet. You can use any paper, it doesn't because I'm using a touch of acrylic paint, I'm going to use the acrylic paper. Then I've got pens, I've got lots actually of fine liners, so you can use one of those if you haven't got one. And just drawing around. This is, I don't really need to show you this, do I, ladies? I have these tile samples though. You do these nice and quickly, don't need to worry too much. So if you just draw out in your books, and then we can start with the acrylic paint. What you will need is a little brush, like, sure some. Little brush for this. We don't usually use little brushes. I steer clear of them most of the time. And let me show you around the space. I'm going to have to say goodbye to the video.